Commander Susan Wright tapped her fingers on the arm of her command chair. The deep space exploration vessel Aegis hummed quietly around her as it moved through the darkness at the edge of known space. The main view screen showed only stars and distant nebulae, beautiful but empty. "Status report, Officer Martinez," Susan said. Lisa Martinez looked up from her console. "All systems normal, Commander. We're approaching the mapped boundary of Sector 47. After that, it's all uncharted space." Susan nodded. This was what they were here for. To push beyond the known, to map the unmapped. The Aegis was built for this purpose, a blend of scientific research vessel and light military craft. Not that they expected trouble out here, but humanity had learned long ago that exploration required both curiosity and caution. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said Peter Goodman, the sensor specialist. His eyes were fixed on his screen, brow furrowed. "Energy signature about 500,000 kilometers ahead. It's moving." Susan straightened in her chair. "Natural phenomenon?" "No, ma'am. It's too regular. I think it's a ship." The bridge fell silent. They weren't supposed to find anyone out here. This region was well beyond the territories of any known spacefaring species. "Show me," Susan ordered. The main screen shifted to display a magnified view. A dark shape moved against the stars, angular and alien in design. It was at least twice the size of the Aegis. "Are they scanning us?" Susan asked. "Yes, Commander," Communications Officer Kyle Brown replied. "They started the moment we detected them. I think they've been watching us for a while." "Open a channel. All frequencies, standard greeting package." Kyle worked his console. "Channel open, transmitting first contact protocols." Minutes passed with no response. The alien vessel continued its approach, now clearly visible on their screens. Its hull was covered with what looked like weapon emplacements, giving it the unmistakable appearance of a warship. "They're powering up something, Commander," Peter warned. "Could be weapons." Susan kept her voice steady. "Yellow alert. Shields. Up, but keep weapons offline. We're not here to start a fight." Just then, the view screen flickered and an image appeared. The alien was humanoid, but clearly not human. It had grayish-purple skin, 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, and what appeared to be bony plates protecting its head and neck. It wore some kind of military uniform adorned with symbols. "I am Fleet Commander Zartul of the Vraxian Dominion," the alien said, its words translated through the ship's computer. "You have entered restricted space. Identify yourselves." Susan stood, keeping her posture relaxed, but dignified. "I am Commander Susan Wright of the Earth exploration vessel Aegis. We come in peace and did not know this region was claimed. We are on a mission of scientific discovery." The alien commander's upper eyes narrowed. "Earth? Your species is unknown to us. How did you acquire this level of technology?" "We developed it ourselves over many generations," Susan replied. "We're relatively new to deep space travel compared to some species we've encountered." Zartul made a sound that might have been a scoff. "A primitive species should not wander so far from home. It is dangerous." Behind her, Susan could feel her crew tensing. She kept her own expression neutral. "We're aware of the risks of space exploration, Commander Zartul. It's part of our nature to seek knowledge despite such risks." This seemed to confuse the alien. "You admit you are outmatched, yet you ventured here anyway?" Curious. Susan noticed movement on the alien ship. Gun ports were opening. "Commander," Peter whispered urgently. "They're targeting us." Susan raised a hand slightly, signaling her crew to stay calm. "Commander Zartul, we have no hostile intentions. We're happy to withdraw from this region if it belongs to the Vraxian Dominion." Zartul's response was interrupted by a voice off-screen. The alien commander turned away briefly, then faced Susan, again with all 4 eyes wide. "You carry weapons on a ship of exploration?" There was accusation in the translated voice. "Defensive capabilities only," Susan clarified. "Space can be dangerous, as you yourself just pointed out." A tense silence followed. On the bridge of the Aegis, everyone held their breath. You will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded for inspection, Zartul finally declared. If you truly come in peace, you have nothing to fear. Susan carefully considered her options. I'm afraid I can't allow unknown personnel to board my vessel without proper diplomatic protocols in place. Perhaps we could. A flash of light cut her off as something hit the Aegis. The ship rocked violently, throwing several crew members to the floor. Direct hit to our port shield, Peter called out. Shield holding at 78%. Susan grabbed her chair to steady herself. On screen, Zartul looked as surprised as she felt. Who fired? The alien commander demanded, turning to someone. Off screen, there was a heated exchange in their native language. Susan made a quick decision. Tactical position now. Mr. Goodman, keep shields at maximum. Mr. Brown, maintain the channel. The Aegis moved smoothly into a defensive posture, placing a nearby asteroid between them and the largest weapons on the alien vessel. Commander Zartul, Susan said calmly. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We still wish to communicate peacefully. The alien commander stared at Susan with what might have been confusion. You did not flee? No, we didn't, Susan confirmed. That's not our way. We'd prefer to resolve this situation through dialogue. Interesting, Zartul said slowly. Most lesser species run when fired upon, or surrender immediately. Susan smiled slightly. Humans tend to be unpredictable. On the Vraxian ship, Zartul conferred with his officers. Their body language suggested disagreement. Finally, Zartul turned back to the screen. We will continue this dialogue. However, I require more information about your species. You will send 2 representatives to my vessel as a show of trust. Susan frowned. That sounds more like hostages than representatives. Call it what you wish, Zartul replied. But if you truly seek peaceful contact, you will comply. Or we can continue with less diplomatic methods. The threat hung in the air. Susan glanced at her tactical display. The Aegis could run, might, even escape, but that would end any chance of establishing relations with this new species. I'll need guarantees for their safety, Susan said. They will not be harmed if they cooperate, Zartul stated. You have 1 hour to decide. The transmission ended. Susan turned to her senior staff. Options? We could make a run for it, Kyle suggested. Peter shook his head. Their ship is faster than ours according to these readings. What about sending a drone instead? Lisa offered. They'd see it as deception, Susan replied. She stared at the alien ship on the screen. They're curious about us. They could have destroyed us if they wanted to. She tapped her console. Officer Garcia, Officer Powell, report to the bridge. Minutes later, Navy pilot Alan Garcia and Science Officer Diane Powell stood before her. I have a dangerous, but important, mission for you both, Susan explained. We've made first contact with a species called the Vraxians. They want representatives. Alan nodded seriously. You mean hostages? Potentially, Susan admitted. But this is too important to walk away from. I need you to go over there, learn what you can, and show them what humans are really like. Diane adjusted her glasses. Why us? Because, Alan, you keep cool under pressure. And Diane, you notice things others miss, Susan said. Together, you represent the best of what humanity has to offer. Susan looked at the alien vessel looming on the view screen. They think we should be afraid. Show them why humans never fear the void. Alan Garcia and Diane Powell sat in the small shuttle as it crossed the dark space between the Aegis and the massive Vraxian vessel. Neither spoke much. They both understood the risk they were taking. Remember the mission, Alan said finally, breaking the silence. Learn what we can, show them who we are, and stay alive. Diane nodded, clutching her tablet. I've downloaded everything we know about first contact situations. Not that it's much help with a completely new species. The shuttle approached the alien ship, which grew larger and more intimidating by the second. Its hull was covered with strange markings and what appeared to be weapon ports. A section of the hull slid open, revealing a hangar bay bathed in purple light. "Guess that's our invitation," Alan said, guiding the shuttle inside. The hangar bay was enormous, with several Vraxian vessels docked in neat rows. As their shuttle settled on the deck, they saw armed Vraxians forming a perimeter around them. "Welcoming committee looks serious," Diane whispered. "Remember what Commander Wright said?" "Show no fear," Alan replied. He stood up and straightened, his uniform. "Let's go meet our hosts." They stepped out of the shuttle into air that smelled slightly metallic. 6 Vraxian soldiers immediately surrounded them, weapons held at ready positions. The aliens were taller than humans by about a foot, with muscular builds and those distinctive 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. One Vraxian stepped forward. Unlike the others in their metallic armor, this one wore a uniform with colorful insignia. "I am Subcommander Vexlon. You will follow me." Alan and Diane were escorted through corridors that seemed designed for creatures larger than humans. Everything was angular, with sharp edges and minimal decoration. They passed Vraxians, who stopped to stare at them with all 4 eyes. "They're as curious about us as we are about them," Diane murmured. "Silence," one guard ordered. "Speak only when addressed by superiors." Alan raised an eyebrow at Diane but remained quiet. They were led into a large chamber where Fleet Commander Zartul waited, surrounded by what appeared to be senior officers. "The human specimens," Zartul announced, studying them carefully. "Smaller than I expected." Alan stepped forward. "We're not specimens. We're representatives of Earth and the human race. I'm Lieutenant Alan Garcia, and this is Science Officer Diane Powell." A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the Vraxian officers. Zartul silenced them with a gesture. "You speak boldly for a member of an unknown species in a precarious position," Zartul said. "Do you not recognize your situation?" "We recognize it perfectly," Diane replied calmly. "We're unarmed visitors on your ship, surrounded by armed soldiers of a technologically advanced species. But we're here on a mission of peace and understanding." Zartul's upper eyes narrowed while his lower ones widened, an expression the humans couldn't interpret. "Take them to Examiner Nevrin," he ordered. "I want a full biological and psychological assessment." The guards led Alan and Diane deeper into the ship, eventually arriving at what appeared to be a medical facility. A smaller Vraxian with pale skin and wearing a different type of uniform approached them. "I am Nevrin, Chief Examiner of Xenobiology," the alien said. "You will submit to examination." Alan crossed his arms. "What kind of examination?" Nevrin seemed surprised by the question. "Standard protocols, physical assessment, tissue sampling, stress response testing." "Tissue sampling?" Diane asked. "You mean you want to take pieces of us?" "Small samples only," Nevrin assured them. "The pain will be minimal." Alan shook his head. "No invasive procedures without our consent. That's not negotiable." The guards stepped forward, raising their weapons slightly. Nevrin held up a hand to stop them. "Interesting," the examiner said. "Most captured species do not attempt to set conditions." "We're not captured," Alan corrected. "We're here voluntarily as representatives." Nevrin's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "Very well. We will begin with non-invasive scans and observation." For the next several hours, Alan and Diane were subjected to various scans and tests. They answered countless questions about human biology, society, and psychology. Throughout it all, they maintained their composure, even showing curiosity about Vraxian technology and biology in return. "Your heart rate remains remarkably stable," Nevrin noted while reviewing readings from a scanner. "Even during stress tests." "We're trained for high-pressure situations," Alan explained. "But you're not soldiers," the examiner said. "Your commander called you explorers." Diane smiled. "Exploration requires its own kind of courage. Space is dangerous. We accept that." "Peculiar," Nevrin muttered, making notes on a device. "Most species evolve to avoid danger, not seek it out." Later, they were taken to a small room with 2 bed-like platforms and basic facilities. The door closed behind them with an ominous click. "Well, we're not dead yet," Alan said quietly, checking the room for obvious surveillance. "That's something," Diane nodded, sitting on one of the platforms. "They're confused by us. Did you notice how surprised they were when we asked questions? Back?" "Yeah. I think they expected us to be terrified," Alan replied. "What do you make of them?" "Hierarchical, militaristic, but curious," Diane said. "I think they've encountered other species before, but none quite like us." Alan paced the small room. Back on the Aegis, Susan must be going crazy with worry. Meanwhile, on the human ship, Commander Wright was indeed worried, but focused. She gathered her senior staff in the conference room. "It's been 8 hours since we lost contact with Alan and Diane," she said. "Options?" "We could try to send a rescue team," suggested Kyle Brown. "And likely start a war we can't win," Susan replied. "No, we need to be smarter about this." "Commander," Lisa Martinez called from her console, "the Vraxian ship is moving. They're heading into the Cassini Drift." Susan frowned. The drift was a dangerous region filled with radiation and unstable gas pockets that could ignite with the slightest energy discharge. Most ships avoided it entirely. "They're testing us," she realized. "They think we'll be too afraid to follow." "Are we?" Peter asked quietly. Susan stood, determination in her eyes. "Prepare the ship. We're going after them." Back on the Vraxian vessel, in the middle of what the humans assumed was night cycle, the door to their room slid open unexpectedly. Alan tensed, ready for trouble, but no one entered. "Power fluctuation," Diane whispered. Alan moved cautiously to the door and peered out. The corridor was empty, with only emergency lighting active. "I think they're having technical problems," he said. "Maybe from entering the drift." "What should we do?" Diane asked. Alan thought for a moment, then smiled. What would any human do when left in an alien ship with an unlocked door? "Explore?" Diane replied with a matching smile. "Exactly," Alan said, stepping into the corridor. "Let's show these aliens why humans never fear the void." Alan and Diane moved silently through the dimly lit corridors of the Vraxian ship. The emergency lights cast purple shadows that made navigation difficult, but they pressed on, memorizing their path. "We need to find some kind of control room or data center," Diane whispered. "Something that can tell us more about these aliens." Alan nodded. "And maybe find out why they brought us into the drift." They passed several closed doors, carefully avoiding the few Vraxian crew members they spotted. The ship rumbled occasionally, small vibrations that suggested something wasn't right with the engines. "They're having technical problems," Alan said quietly. "Whatever they expected from the drift, this isn't it." They turned a corner and froze. Ahead was a large open doorway with several Vraxians inside, frantically working at control panels. From their position, Alan and Diane could see a large screen showing swirling clouds of colorful gas outside the ship. "That must be the Cassini Drift," Diane whispered. "It's beautiful but deadly." They watched as the Vraxians argued among themselves, their translator picking up fragments of conversation. "Shields failing in Section 7. Radiation levels. Increasing. Stabilize the reactor core." Alan looked at Diane. "They're in trouble. Serious trouble." Before they could decide what to do, a voice came from behind them. "What are you doing outside your containment?" They turned to see Examiner Nevren standing there, 4 eyes blinking rapidly in what might have been surprise or anger. "Your door was open," Alan said simply. "We decided to look around. In a crisis situation, you chose to wander an alien vessel rather than remain safely confined?" Nevren's voice contained disbelief. Diane shrugged. "We thought we might be able to help." "Help?" The alien's upper eyes narrowed. How could primitive beings help with Vraxian technology? Before either human could answer, a violent shudder ran through the ship. Alarms began blaring and the lights flickered. "What's happening?" Alan asked. Nevren hesitated, then replied, "We've entered a particularly dense region of the drift. The radiation is affecting our systems more severely than anticipated." "Why did you come here in the first place?" Diane asked. "This area is clearly dangerous." To test your commander, Nevrin admitted. No species would follow us into the drift to rescue mere crew members. Alan smiled. You don't know humans? Very well. Just then, a Vraxian officer rushed up to Nevrin, speaking rapidly in their native language. The examiner's posture changed immediately, becoming more rigid. What is it? Diane asked. Another ship has entered the drift, Nevrin said slowly. Your ship, the Aegis. Alan and Diane exchanged knowing looks. Told you, Alan said. Another, more violent tremor shook the ship. This time several panels sparked and a section of ceiling collapsed nearby. The radiation levels are critical, Nevrin said, a new tone in the alien's voice that might have been fear. The shield generators are failing. Diane stepped forward. Let me see the readings. I'm a science officer specializing in radiation phenomena. Nevrin hesitated only briefly before leading them both into the control room. The Vraxian officers stared in shock at the humans but were too busy with the crisis to object. Diane quickly studied the displays, asking questions about the readings and the ship's systems. After a few minutes, she turned to Nevrin. Your shield. Modulation is all wrong for this type of radiation, she explained. You need to adjust the frequency to match the specific radiation signature of the drift. That's impossible, one Vraxian officer objected. Our shields operate on standard frequencies. Standard for what you normally encounter, Diane countered. But the drift is different. Humans have studied similar phenomena. Trust me, if you don't adjust, your shields will completely fail within an hour. Fleet Commander Zartul entered the control room, immediately noticing the humans. Why are the prisoners here? Sir, Nevrin began. They may have valuable input on our current situation. Zartul's four eyes focused on the humans. Explain. Alan stepped forward. Commander, your ship is in danger. The radiation in the drift is affecting your systems in ways you didn't anticipate. Diane here believes she can help adjust your shields to protect against it. And why would you help us? Zartul asked suspiciously. We are effectively your captors. Because that's what humans do, Alan replied simply. When faced with a crisis, we solve problems. We don't let people die if we can help, even people who might be enemies. Another violent shake threw several officers to the floor. Sir, a Vraxian at a console called out, shield strength down. To 28%. Zartul looked at the humans, then at his failing ship. Show us, he ordered Diane. For the next hour, Diane worked alongside Vraxian engineers, explaining the principles behind her suggested modifications. Meanwhile, Alan helped coordinate emergency repairs to damaged systems, surprising the aliens with his knowledge of basic engineering principles. Your shuttle pilot knows engineering? Nevrin asked as Alan correctly identified a power routing issue. Most humans have multiple skills, Alan explained while reconnecting a circuit. We believe in being adaptable. In space, specialization can be dangerous. If the engineer dies, someone else needs to step up. A strange philosophy, Nevrin commented, but perhaps effective. On the bridge, Zartul received a communication. Commander, we're detecting the human vessel. They're transmitting a message. On screen, Zartul ordered. Commander Susan Wright's face appeared. Vraxian vessel, this is Commander Wright of the Aegis. We've followed you into the drift to retrieve our crew members. We also notice you're experiencing technical difficulties. We're prepared to offer assistance. Zartul stared at the screen in disbelief. You followed us into this dangerous region for just 2 crew members? Of course, Susan replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We don't abandon our people. Now, do you need help or not? Our sensors show your shield strength is critical. Zartul looked around at his struggling crew, at the humans helping them, and made a decision that would change the course of Vraxian history. We accept your assistance, Commander Wright, he said. Alan and Diane, hearing this from their positions in the control room, shared a smile. See? Alan said to Nevrin. This is why humans never fear the void. Because when faced with the unknown, we don't run away. We run toward it, Diane added, and we bring others with us. Nevrin's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as the alien considered this strange but compelling human philosophy. Outside the viewport, The swirling colors of the Cassini drift surrounded both ships as they moved closer together, former adversaries now united against a common threat. The Aegis moved alongside the much larger Vraxian vessel. Both ships now worked together to weather the dangers of the Cassini drift. Commander Susan Wright had come aboard the alien ship with a small team of engineers to help with the repairs. "Your shield modifications are working," Zartul admitted as he and Susan stood on the Vraxian bridge. "The radiation levels are dropping within safe parameters." "Diane knows her stuff," Susan replied. "Now we need to get both ships safely through this region." The Vraxian commander studied the human with his 4 eyes. "I do not understand your species. We took your crew members. We threatened your ship, yet you risk your lives to help us." Susan smiled. "If we only helped those who were nice to us, we wouldn't have survived long as a species. Sometimes the greatest allies begin as enemies." Before Zartul could respond, alarms blared across the bridge. "Commander!" A Vraxian officer called out. "We're detecting multiple objects approaching. Energy signatures unknown." "On screen," Zartul ordered. The main view screen shifted to show several dark, crystalline objects moving through the colorful gases of the drift. They seemed to absorb the light around them, creating patches of darkness. "What are those?" Susan asked. "Unknown," Zartul replied, tension in his voice. "We have no records of such entities in this region." On a lower deck, Alan and Diane were working with Nevren when they felt the ship's engines change pitch. "Something's wrong," Alan said, looking up from the console he was repairing. Nevren checked a nearby communication panel. "We've encountered unknown entities in the drift. The commander has ordered battle stations. We should get back to the bridge," Diane suggested. When they arrived, they found Susan and Zartul standing side by side, staring at the view screen where the dark objects were now clearly visible and moving closer. "Commander Wright," Alan called, relieved to see his captain. Susan nodded to her crew members but kept her attention on the screen. "Any idea what we're dealing with?" "They're silicon-based," a Vraxian science officer reported. "Highly organized structure. And they're feeding on the energy fields in the drift." "They're getting closer," Diane observed. "Are they curious or hostile?" They got their answer moments later when one of the crystal-like objects accelerated suddenly toward the Vraxian ship. It attached itself to the hull with a shudder that everyone felt. "Hull breach in Section 12, a Vraxian reported. "The entity it's absorbing energy directly from our power conduits." "Parasites," Zartul growled. "Target and fire." "Wait," Susan interrupted. "Let's try to communicate first." But another tremor shook the ship as more of the entities attached themselves to both vessels. "Our power levels are dropping rapidly," the Vraxian engineer reported. "Shields failing." "They're not just parasites," Diane said, studying the readings. "They're predators. They hunt energy sources." Zartul turned to Susan. "Your diplomatic approach has failed. We must defend ourselves or be consumed." Susan nodded grimly. "Agreed. But conventional weapons might not work against silicon-based life forms." "What do you suggest?" Zartul asked. Susan looked at her crew. "Diane, could we create an energy surge that might overload them?" "Possibly," Diane replied. "But we'd need to route power from both ships through a single point. It would be dangerous." "I volunteer to help," Alan stepped forward. "I can take a shuttle and place the surge device." The bridge fell silent. Even the Vraxians seemed to understand what Alan was suggesting. "That would be a suicide mission," Nevren stated bluntly. "The entities would attack any energy source, not you." "If we create a bigger, more tempting target," Alan replied, "we could rig the shuttle's power core to emit a specific frequency that would draw them away from the ships." "And then trigger the overload," Susan finished, understanding the plan. "It could work, but—" "It's too dangerous," Zartul interrupted. "I will send a drone." "With respect, Commander," Alan said, "your drones won't have the adaptability needed. If something goes wrong, I can improvise. A drone can't." Susan and Alan locked eyes, a moment of understanding passing between them. "Let me do this," Alan insisted. "This is what we discussed before, running toward the fire, Finally, Susan nodded. Prepare a shuttle, but you're not going alone. To everyone's surprise, a Vraxian officer stepped forward. I will accompany the human. I am Sub-Commander Krell, weapons specialist. Zartul studied his officer. You understand? The risks? I do, Krell replied. If the human is brave enough to face this void, so am I. Within minutes, Alan and Krell were aboard a shuttle, modified with equipment from both ships. The plan was simple but dangerous. Fly toward the heart of the entity swarm, attract their attention with a specially tuned energy signature, then trigger a cascading overload that would hopefully disrupt the silicon predators. Are all humans so willing to face death? Krell asked as they prepared to launch. Alan checked the final connections on the makeshift device. We don't see it as facing death. We see it as solving problems, even if the solution is risky. An interesting philosophy, Krell commented. In Vraxian culture, we are taught to calculate risks precisely. A mission with less than 60% survival probability is considered wasteful. And what's our probability now? Alan asked with a small smile. Krell's upper eyes blinked. Approximately 22%. Yet here you are, Alan pointed out. Yes, Krell admitted. Perhaps I am learning something from you humans. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the swirling colors of the drift and the dark shapes of the entities moving through it. Ready? Alan asked, hands on the controls. Ready, Krell confirmed. The shuttle shot out into the void, immediately attracting the attention of several crystal entities. Alan piloted skillfully, weaving through the gas clouds while Krell monitored the energy levels. They're following us, Krell reported. The lure is working. On the Vraxian ship's bridge, Susan, Diane, and the others watched the small shuttle on the view screen. More entities are detaching from our hull, a Vraxian reported. Power levels stabilizing. The plan is working, Diane said, though her voice was tight with worry. The shuttle flew deeper into the heart of the entity swarm, drawing more and more of them away from the ships. We've reached the optimal position, Krell announced inside. The shuttle. Preparing the overload sequence. Alan nodded, hands steady on the controls even as crystal entities bumped against their hull. Shuttle escape pod ready. 20 seconds until overload, Krell said, typing commands. We must leave now. They rushed to the small escape pod attached to the shuttle. As they sealed themselves inside, the crystal entities completely surrounded the shuttle, drawn to its pulsing energy core. Ejecting, Alan said, hitting the release. The tiny pod shot away from the shuttle just as the first energy surges began. Behind them, the shuttle glowed brighter and brighter as the overload built. Brace for impact, Krell warned. The shuttle exploded in a blinding flash of energy that rippled outward through the drift. The crystal entities caught in the blast shattered into thousands of fragments. On the bridge, everyone shielded their eyes from the brilliant flash on the view screen. Did it work? Susan asked when she could see again. The entities are dispersing, the Vraxian science officer reported with surprise in his voice. The survivors are retreating. And the escape pod? Diane asked urgently. There was a tense moment of silence as they searched the readings. Found it, the officer finally said. Minimal power but intact, life signs detected. Susan let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Send a recovery team immediately. Zartul turned to her, all four eyes wide. Your crew member was willing to sacrifice himself not just for his own ship, but for ours as well. That's who we are, Susan replied simply. When faced with a problem, we solve it. When faced with danger, you run toward it, Zartul finished, understanding finally, dawning in his alien eyes. 1 week had passed since the battle with the crystal entities. Both the Aegis and the Vraxian ship had moved to a safer region of space just outside the Cassini Drift. Repairs were underway on both vessels, with crew members from each ship helping the other. Alan sat in the medical bay of the Vraxian ship as Nevrin checked his healing injuries from the escape pod crash. Your recovery rate is remarkable, the alien examiner noted. Another day and you'll be fully functional. Humans heal quickly, Alan replied with a small smile. Another survival trait. Krell, who had been released from medical care earlier, entered the room. The Vraxian officer had gained a new scar across one side of his face during their mission, but otherwise seemed fully recovered. "The commander requests your presence on the bridge," Krell informed Alan. "Both commanders, actually." Alan nodded, sliding off the examination table. "Good timing, I was getting tired of being prodded and scanned." "Science requires thoroughness," Nevren replied, but there was a new tone in the alien's voice that almost sounded like humor. When Alan arrived on the bridge, he found an unusual sight. Susan Wright and Zartul stood side by side at a holographic display, discussing something with animation that seemed almost friendly. Diane was there too, working with Vraxian officers at a nearby console. "Ah, Lieutenant Garcia," Zartul said, noticing him. "Your wounds have healed?" "Yes, sir," Alan replied, still finding it strange to be addressed respectfully by the alien commander who had once been their captor. "Good. We need your input on something important," Susan explained. "The Vraxians have been analyzing the data we collected on the crystal entities." Diane looked up from her work. "We're calling them the Nexus now. They're a hive consciousness that feeds on energy, and they're returning," Zartul added grimly. "Our long-range sensors detect a much larger swarm heading this way. They've sensed the energy from our ships and are coming to investigate." Alan absorbed this information. "How long do we have?" 3 days at most," Susan replied. "We're discussing our options." "We cannot outrun them," Zartul said. "The Nexus can track energy signatures across vast distances, and we cannot fight them directly. There are too many." "So what's the plan?" Alan asked. Susan and Zartul exchanged looks. It was strange to see how quickly they had developed a working relationship. "We've been sharing information about our respective technologies," Susan explained. "The Vraxians have impressive weapon systems, but their shields aren't designed for the type of attack the Nexus use. And your human vessels have adaptive shielding but limited offensive capabilities," Zartul continued. "We believe a combination of our technologies might create a defense." A new voice joined the conversation. "But it would require complete trust between our species." Sub-Commander Vexilon entered the bridge, carrying data tablets. Unlike before, his posture was less rigid, more open. "The modifications would need to be made to both ships," Vexilon explained. "Essentially linking our systems. Each ship would be vulnerable if the other decided to take control." Alan nodded, understanding the risk. "So this is as much a political decision as a technical one?" "Precisely," Zartul said. "Which is why I've called my most trusted officers here." The bridge doors opened again and more Vraxians entered. Among them was Krell, now wearing a different insignia on his uniform. "I have promoted Krell to First Weapons Officer," Zartul announced. "His experience fighting alongside humans gives him unique insight." Krell stepped forward. "I have studied your species this past week. Humans do not fear the void because you see it as a challenge to overcome, not a threat to avoid. This philosophy has allowed you to develop technologies we never considered." Susan smiled. "And we've learned from you as well. Your ship's weapons systems are remarkable. Together we might stand a chance against the Nexus." Zartul raised a hand for attention. "Before we proceed, there is something else you should know. I have received a transmission from Vraxian High Command." The room grew quiet. Even the human crew understood the significance. "They detected our battle with the Nexus and are sending a battle fleet. They will arrive in 4 days," Zartul continued. "Their orders are to secure this region and neutralize any non-Vraxian presence." "They're coming to kill us," Alan stated bluntly. "Yes," Zartul admitted. "The Dominion does not typically allow new species into our controlled space. You were to be studied, and then eliminated." Susan's expression remained calm. "And what do you think about those orders, Commander?" "I think," Zartul said slowly, "that they are based on ignorance. My crew and I would not be alive without human assistance, and I believe our survival against the Nexus depends on our continued cooperation." He stepped closer to Susan. "I am prepared to defy those orders, Commander Wright. For the first time in my life, I question the wisdom of my superiors." A ripple of surprise moved through the Vraxian officers. Such words were clearly unusual, perhaps even treasonous. "I stand with the commander," Krell announced immediately. "As do I," added Nevern from the doorway where the examiner had been quietly listening. One by one, the other Vraxian officers voiced their support. "So we have two threats," Susan summarized. "The Nexus coming in 3 days, and your fleet arriving in 4. We need to survive both." "If we defeat the Nexus," Zartul said, "we will have proof of what humans and Vraxians can accomplish together. Perhaps even my superiors will listen to reason." "And if they don't?" Alan asked. Zartul's 4 eyes fixed on him. "Then we face that void together as well, Lieutenant." For the next 2 days, both crews worked tirelessly to modify their ships. Humans and Vraxians moved freely between vessels, sharing meals, exchanging stories, and building something entirely new from their combined technologies. On the morning of the 3rd day, they gathered on the bridge of the Vraxian vessel. The view screen showed a dark cloud approaching through space, the Nexus swarm far larger than before. "All modifications complete," Diane reported. "The ships are linked." "Nexus swarm entering weapons range in 5 minutes," a Vraxian officer announced. Zartul turned to Susan. "Commander Wright, I have been studying your human expressions. There is one I find particularly relevant now." "Which one is that?" Susan asked. "Running toward the fire," Zartul replied. "I believe I understand it now." Susan smiled. "Then let's run together, Commander." Zartul addressed his bridge crew and the humans present. "Today we face an enemy that feeds on energy, that consumes technology, that thrives in the void we all travel through. But today they will learn something important." He paused, looking at each face, alien and human alike. "They will learn that the void does not belong to them. It belongs to those with the courage to face it. As our human allies have shown us, we do not fear the unknown. We challenge it. We do not flee from darkness. We bring light to it." The first wave of Nexus entities appeared clearly on the view screen now, their crystalline forms glinting against the backdrop of space. "Battle stations," Susan ordered calmly. As humans and Vraxians moved to their positions, working side by side, Alan caught Diane's eye across the bridge. "Who would have thought?" he said quietly. "Captured one weak, allies the next." Diane smiled. "That's what happens when aliens discover why humans never fear the void." The ships moved forward together directly toward the oncoming swarm, running toward the fire as one.